Welcome to Pizza Quest. I'm Peter Reinhardt, and I'm here today with a very special guest because we're going to have a show that's all about cheese. Joe Salonia, welcome to Pizza Quest. Let me introduce you to our viewers, those who don't already know you from your podcast, Cutting the Curd, which you co-host with a few other cheese, like we call ourselves the pizza freaks. You guys are the cheese freaks.
Mhm.
And I want to get into some cheese with you today, and especially your specialty area. I know that you started out as a classic to the Culinary Institute of America. You worked as a chef. You were a rising star chef in New Jersey. You had a whole culinary career and track lined up. And then around 20 some years ago, you left all that and entered the wide world of cheese, where
Yep.
you were doing marketing and sales for a couple of very large distributing companies. And then, what, 2013 or so, you joined up with Gourmino. As Gourmino is a large cheese company, right? Tell us a little bit about Gourmino, because
Yeah.
you've been with them for the last 10 years,
Yeah.
direct marketing and sales for the United States. So tell us about Gourmino, what you do, and what kind of cheeses you specialize in.
Yeah. As you mentioned, I'm a chef by trade, and those jobs led me to this wonderful opportunity in 2013. Actually, Gourmino in my opinion, a rather small company. It's a cheesemaker owned, 13 cheesemakers own and
Oh,
operate. So it's a rather beautiful model for business. It's deconstructed, decentralized business model where everybody has a voice, and the cheesemakers are the owners of the company, and also do their own affinage. So we produce, age, long ripen, and market all within one company for Gourmino Swiss cheeses, and they're based in the Emmental in Switzerland. And I've been the USA and marketing employee for them uh, for 10 years. It's coming up on 10 years.
so they're based in Switzerland. The company's based in Switzerland. The
Yeah.
cheesemakers themselves are over in Switzerland.
Oh yeah.
These are not American Swiss cheesemakers, but and you mentioned Emmental. Is that the actual location? Is that a city in Switzerland, and that is sort of the home for what we know as Emmentaler cheese?
Yeah, that's the birthplace. So the Emmental is a rather large area. So Switzerland has like cantons or like states, and the biggest one being like Bern is really kind of like the center of where the Emmental history takes place. Although the Emmental area actually spreads out through a large swath, because at one time there were 600 dairies, and now there's only about 115 or so, 110 Emmentaler AOP dairies. So the area still comprises a large swath, but the this is the birthplace of the cheese that we call Swiss cheese, but we call it Emmentaler, and that's how we refer to the cheese. Emmentaler AOP even is a more specific to understand. This is the proprietary version. This is Switzerland Emmentaler AOP, where the original recipe and the original birthplace of this cheese still is being made in a traditional way, handcrafted. Milk is delivered twice a day. It's raw milk. It's long. We're able to long ripen it because of our ability of the crafting cheese with beautiful milk, and the rules that enable that milk to be like a system for the cheesemakers to happen. It's named after the Emmy River and the Emmy Valley, and
Ah,
this is how the cheese gets its name. So this is the original version of what we call Swiss cheese.
Swiss cheese. Yeah. So to Americans, Swiss cheese is sort of this big category, but what we call Swiss cheese here really is in the category specific to Emmental, as opposed to Gruyere and other types of Swiss cheese.
Yeah, and it's actually flipped in a way. So that at the contests that we enter, they'll actually call it Swiss rinded, because there's Swiss unrinded, which we don't make, and then
Ah,
Swiss rinded, which would be the Emmental that you see in the picture behind me, which is where we can put a wheel in for competition. So it's even flipped. So out of the Swiss rinded, you might have other cheeses with holes that have rinds on them, but we're entering Emmentaler AOP, our production, and we've won the title for that category multiple times, like over 10 times over the span of when Gourmino started as a company in 2001. We've won the last three contests for first prize in the Swiss Rhine category. And it's an honor for me, a guy from Northern New Jersey,
yeah.
to uh, to represent. I'm humbled all the time anytime I connect with my team and understand their work. It's just humbling work, because what they're doing is such beautiful work. based in tradition,
Yeah.
and the model and the values in our philosophy are really things we'd love to live by. So we live a certain way, it's our ideals, and it happens to match with the way the cheese is produced and how we want to market the cheese.
So this is not just the mass-produced cheese. This is the artisan version of what we know of as the Swiss style cheeses,
Yeah.
which I want to get into with you because I know for those of you who are with us today, Joe's going to take me through a little tasting in the later segment today. We got 4 cheeses, including Emmental, but I went to my local favorite cheese shop, my cheesemonger, Ormond's Cheese, which carries Gormino's Emmental, but she was out. She was out of your
Ah,
cheese. She did have some of your Gruyere and some other cheeses from Gormino. So I've got 3 cheeses that I picked up at Ormond's, and one cheese that the Emmental is basically a generic that I was able to get at a local market. So what I want to find out from you is what I'm missing in this
yeah.
cheese, and because they're charging a fairly good price for it, so it better be good, but it's probably not going to be what you're doing, and it's probably not raw milk, because you said you're using raw milk
Yeah.
cheese for yours, and so I want to find out all these
Yeah.
nuances and differences because I'm fascinated with the whole world of cheese. I mean, cheese is a huge category in general. We've had some other cheese shows in the past where we've talked about Italian cheeses and this and that, but we haven't focused on the Swiss style. And so we got a lot to learn today, and I want to dive in
It's a
with you. But
lot.
before we do,
Yeah.
Rachel, the owner of Ormond's Cheese, who you know as well as I do, because she used
Yeah.
to have her shop up in New York City,
Yep.
and
Dear friend.
and as soon as I told her what I was doing with you, she said, "You're going to do a show with Joe. Say hi for me, and also make sure you ask him to sing." She said he loves to sing, and I noticed in your bio that it says you love to do cheesy versions of popular and classical songs. Can you give us just a couple bars of a taste of your cheesy songs?
Okay, here's a general one maybe for you. Let me think. Let me get the right 2 bars for you. If you love somebody, if you love someone, if you love somebody, if you love someone, send them cheese, 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 send them cheese.
There you go. There's a Valentine for you, a little
Yeah.
a cheese. That's great.
I
So
always like to connect cheese with love. Our culture of the cheese world, there's a lot of love in the room. We love cheese. It's a very unique culture, the cheese people. Maybe it's the same with the pizza people. I'd love to get to know them. I really would, because I love pizza.
well,
But the
there's an
cheese
awful lot of
people,
crossover.
we're all on the we're really all, and I'll use your word, quest. We're on the quest to constantly raise good flavor profiles through education, through tasting, to get the stories of the cheesemakers out there, so that the cheeses that share these values of handcraft, tradition, history, being made by people that we can name and see, will continue on and not get pushed out by larger manufactured cheeses that aren't speaking to those values. And Gormino's with the last and only affineur that's long ripening, hand washing, and making this cheese in the Emmental. In the
Yeah.
Emmental, and we have 2 affinage houses, so it's we make other cheeses, like Gruyere AOP, one of them.
Yeah.
But Emmentaler AOP is really what's near and dear to our hearts as well.
So you used a lot of terminology that is very, familiar to those who are cheesemakers, and to the listeners of Cutting the Curd, they probably know exactly what you're talking about. The people who are, following us today on Pizza Quest may or may not know some of the things that, that you sort of just mentioned. So I'd like to go back and kind of get a sense of what these things mean. First of all, what is Swiss cheese? And you mentioned something about wash. Was it a running wash or whatever the differences? So yeah, if you could give us sort of Swiss cheese 101 right now, that would be awesome.
Okay, well, we know when people say Swiss cheese. Do you have any Swiss cheese? They're probably looking for a cheese with holes. They may not even be aware that Emmentaler AOP is a choice. There's cheeses like, I don't know. Let's use a very popular one that's out there, is Jarlsberg. Some folks I still have to remind, hey, by the way, that's from Norway. And they're like, Norway?
Oh, yeah.
They make cheese in Norway? I mean, this is people
Tastes like Swiss cheese.
Like, what? How can they do that and call it? And like, I know this is the challenge. So Swiss cheese has, unfortunately, even I think at some point in the 20s, the Swiss, I think he wanted to make it easy for their larger markets, the English speaking, probably America too, to make it easy. So instead of saying Emmentaler, they said just call it Swiss cheese.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it backfired by the time these copies came around and just called. So there was no control over the name until 2001, where the area of protection, the AOP, there's a longer, more elaborate term for it, but for our purposes, it's protected version of the name. It didn't become protected until only 2001. So, and until that point, all these copies had flooded the market under different names. Other companies have set up, even companies that were founded by Swiss immigrants, like in Finland in the
Uh-huh.
1879, because there was a stock market crash in 1879 that doesn't get talked about as much as the big one that we know in the third 1929. But in 1879, there was another slip, and that caused a lot of people to move around. And the Finlandia company was founded by Swiss immigrants, and that's how that recipe and so
So
it's the birthplace of the recipe. Swiss
yeah,
cheese can simply mean, for most people, cheese with holes. So what I say is Emmentaler is the original Swiss cheese with holes.
yeah, yeah.
Sometimes, if I'm doing a
And
quick tasting and I need to give someone a quick bite, like, "Hey, you want to try the original cheese with holes?" Emmentaler AOP. They'll hear the
well,
first
what does
part.
AOP mean? You mentioned that
Yeah,
term a
it's
lot.
basically means area of protection. It's and
Uh,
it's in the translated sense. So it means that a certain geographical area will apply only to where the milk can be gathered. And then there's a set of rules, like I'm talking like a 50-page book on the cow, down to the cow breeds, the temperature on which the milk can be stored, the length of time that it must be stored and delivered before it's made into cheese, what the cows can eat, what they cannot eat. Like for instance, to make a long ripened cheese, you cannot give a cow silage, which is the preserved hay balls that you see in the plastic in farms when you see
uh-huh.
sometimes when you're driving around rural areas. That's basically like coleslaw, or like it's fermented hay. So it puts gas into the cow, puts gas into the milk. The cheeses don't develop properly. So that's a forbidden thing. So it always must be fresh hay, meaning hay that's been dried from the region,
Uh-huh.
or grass. Very little supplemental grains, or the tolerance is tiny if you want to give the cow like a treat. But basically, it just, and then again, there's dozens of rules, right down to how the wheels are labeled, the size they must adhere to, the bacteria. There's even a DNA placed in every wheel, which is an undetectable. It's actually a detectable marking that does not affect any outcome of the cheese, but can be looked at under a microscope just to know whether or not it's a real Emmentaler. If there's a
It's like
question,
putting a GPS on the wheel.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah. This is like the designation of authenticity, and that it's certified to have followed this thick rule book of stipulations on how to make this cheese.
Yeah, so but unfortunately the word Emmentaler, Swiss cheese, if you and I want to make cheese in Pennsylvania, we can and make it with holes. I think it would be pretty lame to call it this, but no one would probably stop us from calling it Emmental or
Uh-huh.
Gruyere. Sadly,
Yeah.
now the word Gruyere by itself, Gruyere, not Le Gruyere AOP, but Gruyere is not protected anymore, according to Virginia court judge. There was a Virginia court ruling, one appeal even, so two rulings in Virginia. And for this reason, it's important to uphold and even say out loud, even if you're not going to expect your guests to remember it, at least for the cheesemongers,
Yes.
to call it Emmentaler AOP, Le Gruyere AOP, and so on for the other proprietary cheeses, because they are copied, and we want the customer to, at least to let the customer make an educated guess, not be
And if you want
fooled.
the real thing and you're shopping, you want to hear that those words, those letters AOP, as a way of sort of designating that you've got the real
Yeah.
deal.
Or see it, see it on the label. Some great shops might not label it that way, but we're trying to encourage, because of this ruling, you're going to see more copies of Gruyere, and especially Gruyere. It's kind of under attack because it's such a well sold cheese that it's too tempting for cheesemakers all over the world to just make a cheese that's kind of like Gruyere, and now they're allowed to call it Gruyere,
Well,
like
I
at
know
least in the USA. So USA makers can call any cheese that they feel like they want to call Gruyere. They can call it Gruyere with impunity now. At least it could change, but that's the update now with this new ruling. So it behooves us, if we're really flying the flag for Le Gruyere AOP, to at least say it, or maybe put your sign in the store to say it, so the customer will at least hear it and let them make an educated decision, that they know it's different than what they might find at another store from, say, a commodity brand that's just labeling their cheese Gruyere or smoked Gruyere, which is also forbidden. There's no such thing as a smoked authentic Gruyere, but there's, you know, these, again, borrowing of the name without permission.
Sure, sure, and marketing folks are famous for being able to appropriate all the hard work that other people put in and grab it and you use it to sell their product instead of having something that says like it's like Gruyere. They can say it's Gruyere and we can't do anything about it.
I mean, I have more respect for the copies that come up with their own ingenious marketing name. I think
Yeah,
that's
give
fine,
them the name, yeah,
you
to
know.
differentiate them.
But it's in this, and then they can explain in maybe their sales meeting, this cheese was inspired by Gruyere. But to actually put the name on the cheese, I think is just really, to me, it's stealing the name.
It's got to feel like a slap in the face to the authentic artisan cheesemakers. But let's step
Yeah,
one step back and say first let's look at Swiss cheese in general, and
yeah,
then Gruyere is one type, Emmental is the type. Let's come back and zero in on each one
yeah.
because they're all different from each other. But what
So much
makes
so.
cheese, in this sort of quote Swiss category? What is the type of cheese and how is it made in general?
Well, many of them, not all, many of them are what we call cooked curd cheeses, and then they're aged. So cooked and pressed curds, cooked and pressed cheeses are going to be cheeses where after the rennet is introduced, which kind of makes the curd separate from the whey, then the curd is cut.
Yeah.
Then you have a lot of water in with the little kernels of curd that have been cut. At that point, they cook the curd further to
Ah.
make more water come out of the curd. And
And by
then
cooking them, they just add more hot water to it. Is that at a certain temperature?
sometimes they'll add water, but it's more about heating up the kettle.
Oh, hitting the
And,
kettle. Okay. So
and
that,
this is where a copper kettle is really important because copper can conduct heat 20 times more efficiently than stainless steel. So you don't want to have hot spots. So a copper kettle is sometimes a rule even for some of the cheeses, like a Gruyere AOP. The copper must come up totally to the top. It must be 100% lined with copper in
wow.
order for it to be made. And this step, which was discovered maybe more than 1,000 years ago, which also preserved cheese longer. So when you're able to age cheese longer, you need it to be drier. So you need to cook and expel more water out of the curd in order to press it more, make it firm, and then age it in a cellar like you see behind me.
Uh-huh.
And that there you can take a cheese if it's good. If the milk was good, the craft was done well, and there were no funny things happening with anything where it would throw the cheese off its profile. You can age it up longer to maybe 2 years.
So the cooking of the curds is not something that occurs with every type of cheese up until the
No,
point of making the curds, cutting them, and that's very much like every cheese. And then at this point, an additional step of heating the curds to a certain temperature is part of the signature of this style.
yeah, it's a signature for many of the styles in Switzerland. Not all, but many. I mean, there are uncooked curds. There are cheeses that resemble like a camembert. Camembert is not a cooked curd. You set the curd, then you ladle it as big a piece of. It'll look like panna cotta, a big a
Yeah.
piece of milk jello that you can take out of the little
Yeah, it feels like custard.
stock pot of set curd. You'll ladle it into a mold, trying to put the least amount of moves so that it stays creamy. So the more you cut it and the more you cook it, the firmer of a cheese you're going to wind up getting, like a Parmigiano. The more uncooked, bigger curd, that's how you get creamy cheeses.
I see. So the cooked curds. Okay, so now let's say we're talking about Emmental, for instance. We'll focus on that particular cheese. So those are made from cooked curds
Yep.
that are then put into a mold of some sort, and
Yep.
essentially press as much water as possible is pressed out of it.
Yep. They're
And then
pressed.
and then is there something called a washed rind? What is
Well,
what is there a washing that takes place?
yeah, well, it'll go into a brine in this case, like many other cheeses are brines. Some cheeses that are going through this step can also be hand salted, but in this case, for Emmental, they're put into a dense saltwater brine for about 2 days, and that'll
Wow.
form not only flavor, but it'll form a crust. It'll form an equilibrium, of saline inside the cheese, which also help balance bacterial growths for certain, and less so for undesirable type microorganisms. And then from there, the washing must continue. So you want a microflora to start developing on the crust on the rind, which will
Mhm.
happen like some fuzzy, greenish, whitish, usually white, slightly greenish molds, which is
Uh-huh.
normal. And then it's washed with saltwater brine. In our case, by hand at the start, and then some for longer ripening will get a wash with a robot. But all of ours are washed at some point in their lifespan by hand,
By
meaning like
hand.
cloth, and one of our workers is in there, and like the way they wash their car, because these wheels are big. It's like washing a small Volkswagen Beetle or something. It's
So the
they're
washing is critical to the process. I'm thinking now, I'm just thinking as a layman, because the salt in the wash controls the bacterial
Mhm.
development. Is there any bacteria injected into the milk itself
Yep.
before it goes into the curding to start a particular flavor development?
Absolutely, and that's like the spice rack, if you will, of the recipe. That's the inoculation or introduction of the whatever enzymes. So Switzerland has the greatest stockpile of probably bacteria in the world. They have one major laboratory which has preserved 15,000 different strains of bacteria. Each dairy has their own independent bacteria. Some dairies will propagate their own whey cultures. Like we have one dairy that actually makes their own whey cultures and also introduces this bacteria into their make. And it's the difference between, like, say, an Emmentaler and a La Gruyere. What the biggest difference will be that different bacterias are involved, giving different flavor.
That's
Biggest
so
difference. The
so the
biggest,
name so the type of cheese is partly determined by the type of bacteria
yeah, that's going to steer the
being
flavor the most.
is Gruyere like Emmental is an actual area and region. Is Gruyere also a region of
Yeah, well,
Switzerland that's known for their style of cheese?
Gruyere is a actual town, a village,
Okay.
Gruyères, and then there's four little cantons that are five now. Bern is included, that are surrounding those areas. They're
So so
comprising. It's all in southwestern Switzerland.
so I know that for some things, like with sourdough bread, for instance, we know that there's this culture of various bacteria that help to form those flavors. Do each of these regions have their own sort of indigenous bacterial strains that influence the flavor to give it that distinctive Jarlsberg
Absolutely.
or Emmental, character?
Absolutely, absolutely, they do. And so I want to speak to that in a second. And I just want to even emphasize, so that bank of bacteria. It's great that they collected at one point 15,000 strains from all the dairies that ever were, because some of those dairies no longer make cheese, and they at least captured what they were making. Because at one point it was always made only in the dairy. That's the only way that bacteria was ever, grown. It was self-made cult. So if you go back 40, 50 years, not even that long, that was the only way to get your bacteria going, was to self-propagate your own house
Kind of like
culture and make
keeping a
cheese.
sourdough starter, you had to have your
Yeah,
own mother starter.
exactly. And there's a lot of trends where we see that's happening more and more, especially in America, some American cheese making. In Switzerland, for the AOP cheeses, I guess the choice was made at one point to have more continuity, to have, moreover, lab grown bacterial cultures, with some exceptions. Maybe you're allowed to add, for some AOP cheese, maybe you're allowed to add in some of your own house cultures, but they must include these other cultures in order for it to be, qualified as whatever AOP cheese it is. And then it'll get inspected. Usually the AOP cheeses are not just produced and put into market. There's a third party that they're kind of controlling all the quality. Like, for instance, IGP is the Gruyere entity that will control Emmentaler AP. They also have their own entity where they're going to control the quality to make sure that it's at least up to the standard of what Emmentaler should, the minimum that it can bear for
Uh-huh.
quality, taste, appearance, texture profile, all the things. And only then can it bear the label if it's going through progression, before it's released. Which is, again, the arrogance of this ruling in Virginia, is that there's none of that happening with whoever decides to call their cheese Gruyere. It's their own QC and their own house, and then if they want to call it, they call it. But there's nobody checking the quality. So even a Le Gruyere AOP dairy is not guaranteed the privilege of calling every wheel that they produce Le Gruyere AOP. There still
Uh-huh.
has to be an inspection for every lot in order for them to bear that label. And sometimes the cheese cannot bear the label, and it's usually sold as a secondary mountain cheese, not under the name.
Interesting. So, but it'll find a life somewhere, but not with the same cachet and with
Yes.
the same price point either, probably.
Yeah, sure. All of
So,
the
so
above.
now we've got this sort of general category, and we're coming to a point where we're going to want to take a little break here because I'm dying to dive into these cheeses that I have
Yeah.
behind me. Have you guide me, through the tasting because we know that there's bacteria at work here creating and influencing flavors. There's a type of the curds have been cooked that differentiates it from, say, a lot of the Italian style cheeses that are not cooked curds, and or the French cheeses. There's also I have a Gruyere here. No, I have another one. Here a raclette, which is technically I think it's a Swiss cheese, but this one is a French raclette. The French seem to have again appropriated
Yeah.
ownership of the raclette category. But I want to learn about each one of these and why they're different. And I'm guessing it starts with the combination of the cooked curds, the bacterial choice that's used in those, and then the washing of the rinds in the cheeses that use a washed rind cheese. These are all characteristics of this style that fall under the big umbrella of Swiss cheese, but then get differentiated into specific types. So far,
Yeah.
am I checking it off right?
Yeah, I mean, you're accurate. It's general what you're saying. There's deeper dives into all the
Yeah,
things you said, but yes.
yeah. Well, we're still in class 101.
Yeah,
So
we're
when
keeping
we
it
come back
101.
from
I'm
the
not a cheesemaker either. I'm speaking from what my
you're our bridge to this world that's a world of mystery to anyone who hasn't studied it. Just like wines and beers are mysteries to people that are just diving in for the first at the beginning.
Yeah.
But hopefully, by the time we finish today, I'll be at 201 or 202 instead of 101.
Yeah.
Because I want to get further along because I want to be able to go into a conversation at a cheese board somewhere with folks and impress them with a little bit of knowledge that I gleaned from you today. So
Sounds like
why don't
fun.
we
Yeah.
take a break, Joe? We'll
Okay.
come back in part two, and you can guide me through these cheeses that we've assembled here and turn me into a little bit of a cheese wonk.
Okay. Sounds great.
All right, and we're with Joe Salonia. He's with Gormino Cheese Company, but more importantly, to all of us in the Heritage Radio Network world, he's one of the co-hosts of Cutting the Curd, a weekly podcast that airs that you can go back and watch and listen to all sorts of episodes that they've already posted and will continue to post. I got to be a guest on your podcast yesterday, and today you're returning the favor and coming on our podcast.
Yeah.
So we're kind of crossing over and sharing our various what do you call it, our individual quests, but also our sort of passions for the subjects that we love. So Joe, thank you. We'll see you in part two. We'll see all of you in part two. Join us in just a couple of moments. Welcome back to Pizza Quest. I'm Peter Reinhardt. I'm here with Joe Salonia of Gormino Cheese, a company that specializes in Swiss style cheeses. We'll use as we've learned in part one of today's episode, a big generic category that has much more specifics hidden within there. And we're going to learn about those specifics in part two. Before we start the tasting, I wanted to ask you about something else that I know you were associated with something called the Save the Emmenthaler campaign, or what is that?
Oh, thanks for asking. So the Save the Emmentaler campaign just speaks again to our philosophies and values in preserving and celebrating the canonical original king of Swiss cheese, which is the cheese with holes, the cheese that, I mean, if you ask a fourth grader to draw a cheese, they're going to draw an Emmentaler. The emoji on our iPhone is, as the cheese emoji is, by all measures, an Emmentaler AOP cheese, or that's how it's so. But unfortunately, it's copied, and the market is filled with many copies. And just through education and celebration, we want to help people rediscover this cheese that might not already be familiar with, understanding what's the difference, and also why should it matter,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the why is actually the biggest part, is that it preserves tradition, preserves landscapes, you could argue. It preserves a lot of beautiful systems that would otherwise go away, that really make this world, to me, a better place than if it were not.
So it really is, it speaks to the sort of uh, other analogies, the slow food movement, or other artisan movements. We have one in the pizza world called These Hands movement, which is to respect the craft of the artisans who make pizzas by hand, and this is cheese that's made by hand as well.
100%. It is made by hand. They're just with the assistance of some, with the kettle and some lifting and things like that. But it's made by hand, washed by hand, aged, tasted. All that's done with our team. And we actually have a slow food production, an Emmentaler AOP that meets the slow food criteria. So it's one dairy only, and it's even a longer list of caveats of what must apply to the AOP. It's even stricter rules, everything down to the elevation of where the dairy lies, its proximity to the cellar, proximity to the dairy farmers, the almost zero tolerance of the cow's diet can be, just really
Wow.
comprised of hay and grass, and the self-produced house cultures actually are a requirement for the slow food.
Is there a
Uh,
particular breed of cow that is associated with the Emmental cheese?
Well, there's the Simmental breed, which is the oldest breed in Europe, in theory, that's walking around, and those cows are around. And then there's a breed that's kind of a hybrid of the Red Holstein and the Simmental, I believe, and that's called the Red Fleckva, and that's very common as well. But breeds will apply,
Uh-huh.
to what can be allowed.
Another thing that comes up in some types of cheese making is whether you're using morning milk or afternoon milk. Are there designations like that with the Swiss?
You must use both. You technically it's both. Cows get milked twice a day, so there's an evening delivery, and then there's a morning delivery. And the cheese must be made, I think, for Emmentaler. For Gruyere, I think it's 15 hours. That you can't have milk stored longer than 15 hours for Le Gruyere AOP. For Emmentaler, it may be slightly longer, but not much. Like no longer than 18 hours. If not, it's 15, 18, somewhere in there. That milk that was delivered the evening before must be made into cheese, or you have to start with a different batch in order to make the cheese.
If you don't get it turned into cheese, then you might as well just turn it into yogurt or
Yeah, or a
drink.
mountain
Yeah.
cheese,
Yeah.
maybe another cheese, but it
Um,
won't be allowed. And then all this is tracked, that the schedule, the deliveries, that there's a logbook this thick, many times handwritten or used or transposed into a computer system these days, where everything is logged in. That the samples that are taken from each batch for safety measures, for also for quality measuring. Some of our dairies will pay more. They have like a little incentive plan, like, hey, if you deliver me fattier and more protein rich milk, I pay you a little more per liter. So it incentivizes the dairy farmers to do better work, feed their cows, keep them healthier, and produce better, more pristine milk. And then our cheesemaker will have a system where they'll get paid a little more for that delivery when they
Are
measure
there,
it.
are there American companies that are partnered up with Gormino to kind of bring an American version of Emmental to this country in partnership or in any kind of relationship with Gormino, or are they two separate entities altogether?
There's no partnership that I'm aware of that, but I don't know how that could. I guess it could be, if they're doing good work, maybe there's a way to where a rising tide raises all the boats. But they're really two separate entities at this point, two different systems. Especially the fact that we're talking about a proprietary
Yeah.
cheese. It would be a trickier thing to breach as opposed to just like maybe a mountain cheese. There would be, hey, if we make this mountain cheese over here that's not AOP, not proprietary, and then we deliver it to you young, and then you age it in your cave. That's happening. Those kinds of things, not with Gormino, but those kinds of things are happening
I see.
with other
Yeah.
American, sellers, or in their cellar, in their affinage.
Well, I have four cheeses behind me. I have an Emmentaler that is of designation unknown because it came from a supermarket. It was priced as an imported Emmentaler. I don't know if it is, or if it's just an American company stealing the name again, as we discussed in part one. I have two types of Gruyere. I have a 6 month age and you advised me to get these. I believe these are both from Gormino. They came from Ormond's cheese shop, and she has a relationship with Gormino. So I have a 6 month and a 12 month. So we're going to see the differences between those. Notice also in my Emmentaler, there's holes, classic,
Can you
Swiss
show me the
cheese type.
rind? You bring the rind a little closer. Let's
It's
see.
it's not much of a rind there to see. It's just
You
it's a little
you
waxy
raise it
looking.
up. Raise it up a little higher. There you
You
go.
see
Yeah.
that?
So the label's taken away. I don't. So we have no idea knowing whether that's even an. I'm gonna guess it's just by the shape. It's not Emmental or AOP, but let me see the whole thing
It's
again.
definitely not. It's not AOP because they would have wouldn't
Uh,
they put that on there. They were charging $23, almost $24 a pound. So that sounds like an imported, but there's nothing on here. It just says it does say fresh part skim cow's milk,
doesn't,
cultures, salt, and enzymes.
doesn't say what country it's from though, and there's
Nothing.
no label or any. And what's the shape of it again? Can you show me?
Well, mine's a little
Very square.
rectangular cut off of a wheel. I'm sure it's got
Yeah.
the holes. It's got a little bit of a shiny rind,
Yeah.
but got a nice aroma.
I'm sure
But
it's
anyway,
tasty.
this is
Yeah.
pardon me.
Yeah, I'm sure it's tasty. I'm gonna guess it could be. It could be what's called Switzerland Swiss, which is not. Which is even in Switzerland, they have to keep up with all the brick and block producers that are rindless. In other, because almost every country produces a block rindless Swiss cheese, and even in Switzerland, they feel that they have to keep up and produce this cheese,
If
which is
it's
different than
rindless,
Emmentaler AOP.
if it's rindless, does that mean it hasn't been washed in a brine?
I'm not even sure what it. I've never really visited the production, but it doesn't have the rind like what's behind me. I can tell you that it's just
Well, I'll
it's
tell
more
you,
like just naked looking, almost like what you have.
Rachel
Um,
told me that her next batch of Gormino Emmental will be coming in on Thursday. Today is Tuesday when you and I are talking,
uh,
and so I'm going back in 2 days to get the real deal. I want to
yeah,
try that now, and I'll do a
yeah,
little side tasting later to compare the two. But then I've got the two Gruyere, so there should be a
okay,
difference between a 6 month aging and a 12 month aging. What's the minimal
yeah.
amount of aging in these cheeses before they can be released?
That's a great question. So Le Gruyere AOP has a minimum age of 5 months for it to bear the label, and Emmentaler AOP has a minimum age of 4. And what you have there, not only are they two different ages, but they are actually two different cheese makers.
Yeah.
So we like to partition not only our age difference, but we usually designate. We have 3 Le Gruyere AOP cheesemakers and 9 Emmentaler AOP cheesemakers on our team that comprise the 12. So for each profile, we designate a different cheesemaker where we think their strengths lie in each age, so we can really focus on the conversation with the cheese shop.
Well, good, because these are both designated AOPs. And then I've
Yeah,
got the raclette, which it says specifically on there. She said, note that it says French raclette, not Swiss raclette. So that's a whole cheese we haven't really talked much about, but I know that a lot of people love to view it as sort of the ultimate melting cheese, the melt and dip and scoop kind of cheese.
yeah.
What is a raclette? How's it differ from the cheeses we've been talking about?
So earlier when we were talking about the temperature of how the curd is cooked and the cutting, so raclette is first. I mean, first the bacterials are different, so it's acidified differently, but the pH is different. But the curd will be cut not as small. The temperature when it's cooked will be nowhere near the higher temperature of the other one. I mean, in that case, it's past. That might be a pasteurized milk, but that means the pasteurization happened before it went into the vat. So then they could still cook it
I
at a
see.
low temperature, and
But it
then
definitely feels softer than the
yeah,
Swiss cheeses. Yeah.
and that lends that affects the texture. Yeah,
Wow. All right.
along
Well,
with bacteria and enzymes.
I'm ready to do some tasting. Should we start with the Emmental?
Yeah, start with it. See what you.
Okay, I'm going to cut
I can be
myself
there
off a
with
little
you.
piece. I've got my little cheese knife here.
Yeah.
What's the best way to kind of taste cheese to really grasp its essence?
I think it's like wine. I think you smell it, you hold it. You want to make sure it's room temperature if it's possible, because you're gonna really,
I
you're gonna
pulled
let
it
it.
out a few hours ago. Yeah.
You take a bite, let it sit in your mouth for a little, maybe 1 or 2 seconds longer, almost like the equivalent of swirling wine, but you're not gonna swirl the cheese. And then when you eat it and swallow, you keep your mouth closed and breathe out your nose. That engages all your taste buds in the back of your tongue and through. And you'll get more flavor out of it that way if you swallow and then exhale out of your nose.
And I'm breathing in through my mouth, and I can feel already the almost, I don't know if it's the esters or the vapors of the cheese kind of going into my olfactory senses, and it definitely suddenly changes. The flavors change and get more complex and more. I don't know if it's acidic is what I'm tasting, but it has an acidity to it.
Yeah, I usually refer to that as hopefully a lactic, like like kind of a bright note, maybe. On younger cheeses, they tend to be a little more that way, a little more brighter.
Mm.
Um, the word in the cheese world, the word acid usually applies to like more of a technical sense. Like you ever have a really sharp provolone, like where your ears are like
Yeah,
almost like
yeah,
getting a little
yeah.
funny. That is due to acid development, and that's more of a geeky use of the word acid. For us, we say acid, we think like we're thinking of lemon juice, and even though lemon juice is very alkaline, but like we think of it has a different application in our heads. We think of it more like vinegar and lemons and things that are acidy.
Why do you think that this type of cheese, and I think when I taste this, if someone said here, taste this, what is this? I would say it tastes like a Swiss cheese to me. I mean, it's very
Yeah.
distinctively Swiss cheese as opposed to cheddar cheese or,
Yep.
mozzarella cheese. What, why does it go so well, number one, with ham?
Yeah.
It's the classic combo. And other cheeses that fall in this flavor profile, I would think would be Jarlsberg, would be another type of
Yeah.
similar to Emmental, and
Oh yeah.
what else? There are a couple others that are like that, right?
There's so many. There's baby Swisses almost from like half the states in the union. There's Maasdam, Leerdammer, French Emmental. Um, I remember the first time I was walking with someone from my team in New York, and we went to one of the cheese stores that sell a lot of cheese, and in the front row it was like it said Bulgarian Swiss, French Swiss, Finlandia Swiss,
Yeah,
Polish Swiss. They're like, oh, very interesting.
interesting. Yeah,
Very interesting. Like, for him, it was just like he couldn't believe like just how it's marketed. It's just even beyond the Swiss word. Like you're putting two countries back to back right there. But people know people digest as an American. You get it. You're like, okay, that's a Swiss cheese made in Bulgaria, right? And we think of Swiss cheese. But to his eyes, it was like, gosh, man, it's really boy, it's worse than I thought over here, kind of thing. Like we have some work to do. It's like, yes, we
yeah,
do.
exactly.
It's an
But
opportunity though to help explain. So it's easy when you've heard all these carbon copies or these karaoke versions, and you play someone like the original record, like, oh, okay, Louis Armstrong, I
yeah,
get it. He's a trumpet player. Okay, I've been listening to marching band trumpet. I thought that was trumpet, but now you play me Louis Armstrong.
yeah, right.
Louis Armstrong over here.
Give me the real deal.
It's
Yeah.
it's it's the original.
Wow. Well, it definitely is distinctive, and again, there's got to be kind of a flavor wheel that describes the various flavors that are coming out as I inhale and as I am tasting it and in my full palate. That is definitely so distinctive and different from all the other types of cheeses. And I'm trying, but I don't have the language to say what that is like. But you said it's like a lactic flavor.
Maybe nutty. You get some lactic. Maybe you get lactic, nutty,
Yeah.
and maybe fruity. I'm not
I'm
eating
getting
that.
a little bit of a pear finish. I don't know if that's
Okay,
common
like
note,
pear
but
skin almost. I could get
yeah,
pear
yeah,
skin sometimes.
yeah. Something I'm getting a little of that.
Yeah,
And it's wonderful because it's complex. It's not like you eat it and then it's gone. I've already had a cracker. I've had a sip of my iced tea here, and I'm still tasting it. As I say, I tasted it 5 minutes ago, and I'm still enjoying it 5 minutes later.
yeah.
Even though it's gone from my mouth.
I mean,
So
maybe it is Emmental or AOP, just the label removed and cut really well. I mean, the price would indicate it's around that zone of real Emmental or AOP, but I don't know. It's
the
it's
the
unfortunately they
local
didn't have
markets
it labeled
don't.
that way.
Yeah, they don't have the designated cheesemongers there to explain everything to the customers, so they use the
Sure,
most generic terms as well. But they did use Emmentaler as opposed to Swiss cheese. So I guess
that's encouraging at least.
yeah.
Yeah,
All right, now why don't we move on to the Gruyere? I've got two Gruyères. They're both. Here's
yeah,
the 6 month. This one is the Le Gruyere AOP six
yep,
month.
yep.
So I'll cut off a little piece of that.
Yeah, so that's made by our cheesemaker Michael Hunke, and he took second prize in the Gruyere category this past year in March 22 or a
This is
year
much
ago.
funkier than
Oh
than
yeah,
the Emmental. There's incredible aroma here.
you're gonna get more notes on this one than Emmentaler. It's just always the way it is with Gruyere is like eating four cheeses at once almost. It is a very a lot of it's a chaste profile. It's chased by many cheesemakers.
It's one of my favorite cheeses of all time is Gruyere. Um,
Same here.
I even use it on pizzas.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and of course, it's the classic fondue cheese, isn't it, Gruyere?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's the classic and probably the most famous version, Morte Morte, which is half and half, which is half La Gruyere LP and half Vacherin Free Bourgeois. They're both made in the same region. You do about 50-50. But all four of those cheeses would actually make a really delicious fondue. You know, it's similar to my fondue recipe where I have our raclette. It's a raclette du Valais AOP. We'll talk about that when we get to raclette. Gruyere, and I always put about 25% Emmentaler in my fondue. Um,
And because of the flavor notes that it brings.
Yeah, I like to bring all like different. Each cheese brings a different thing to the party, so to speak. So I usually do three cheeses. I mean, you can make it with just one. You could do it with two. I mean, it just depends on what's practical at the moment. But if I have the choice, I like to do usually three, sometimes four, and put it in the fondue. Each cheese will blend a different aspect. You know, to some will lend creaminess, some will lend body, some will lend
Uh-huh.
complexity. Melt.
There's definitely very different from the Swiss cheese, the first one that we tasted, the Emmental flavor.
You probably
Um,
get more oniony
you-
notes, more base oniony notes maybe to it.
well, that you just gave me the word I was looking for because I couldn't quite nail it. But yeah, yeah, a little oniony, not I wouldn't say garlicky, but oniony, tone. Um, it's not like when you taste the Emmental, you say immediately go, oh, that's a Swiss cheese. With the Gruyere, you're not going to say, oh, that's a Swiss cheese. It doesn't taste like what we call Swiss cheese. Closer more to I don't know, maybe a Fontina or something like that in terms of that funky,
Hmm.
complex flavor.
Yeah, yeah. Gruyere is. It's gonna wait till you taste the next one. It'll be even more symphonic. But the one I get, I think my notes on the Gruyere mild are that I get like almost sweet corn.
Mm,
Sometimes I'll get like a nutty, like a skinless hazelnut or
mm.
vanilla note sometimes. But definitely the onion is in there on
I got
his.
the onion and I got the corn more than I did the hazelnut.
Uh-huh.
As you saying the words, it's almost like the words are coming alive in my mouth
Yeah,
because
that's like the chef in
I
me.
haven't had the.
I only describe things I've like, like try to make it sound like a menu that you're gonna eat when you bite a piece of cheese. Sometimes, like and if it includes a dessert note, then I include that. When it's authentic, it has to be like really what I think and what
Yeah,
I
yeah.
coming from my experience.
Interesting. Well, it's wonderful. I'm going to now. Is it if you're going to do like what I'm doing, sort of a horizontal tasting? Should I clear my palate in between with a cracker or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sure, why not? You know, this way
Just to give
you're.
me a fresh take.
Yeah.
Now we've got
So
the 12-month Gruyere
So
that
the
we want
12
to try.
month is made by three-time world cheese champion Michael Speaker. So this cheese is pretty special in the cheese world, and the fact that this cheesemaker won three times best in show at a contest that has almost 3,500 entries each time. So out of all the categories, so you think of like that, like the famous dog show that's on once a year where each breed wins,
Yeah,
So we've won that many times with the Emmentaler. So we've won like the breed with Emmentaler, but best in show means all the breeds, they pick one dog. It could be any kind of dog. Same thing, could be any kind of cheese that could win in this contest. And Michael's won three times, once in 2008, once in 2020, and again in 2022. And the theory we have as to why he wins is that his Gruyere is it's a little different than the others. There's like this kind of like a tropical fruity type note to it. There's like a baked ham I get sometimes.
mm,
I get like a chestnut note,
yeah,
a
and
chestnut sweetness sometimes.
it's definitely
Full.
definitely different from the 6 month, but it's not as the aroma's not as funky. It doesn't smell. It doesn't just smack you in the face like the first one did. So it's a milder aroma, but then in the mouth it kind of widens and goes really
Yeah,
in
it's almost
a
like
lot of directions.
and I like to think it's expressive. So sometimes I'll taste a Gruyere, not when it's not ours usually, where if I don't like it, the best way to describe why don't I like it is that the flavor just seems like dead. I don't know how to explain it. It just seems like dead and down on the bottom, and there's all too much of one thing, not playing off each other. This is dynamic. It seems alive, almost like you could see on a screen almost what you're tasting. It's expressive,
But it's
structured,
also very balanced.
productive.
It's not like there's any one flavor that dominates. It's almost like a melange of flavors.
Yeah, I mean, it's really wonderful cheese board cheese to discover, and of course, if you put it on a pizza, I'm not gonna argue with you. I mean, go ahead. I mean, it's gonna be delicious,
Yeah,
especially if you when you pull the pizza out and then you put on some freshly sliced prosciutto or something,
yeah.
after the pizza's comes out of the oven, you
I
got
noticed
yourself
that
a ham and cheese right there like no other.
really, yeah. I noticed that there's a kind of a crystal. There's crystals in here. Is
Yeah.
that a common trait?
I think yes, it is. In a well-aged cheese, they're called tyrosine crystals. It's an amino acid chain that forms in the cheese. It tends to add to the gustatory experience and pleasure of eating. It's a rather nice, beautiful quality that we call them some in some circles they call them cheese diamonds, even like cheese.
Ah,
Certainly crystals is more of the ubiquitous term.
so
And
because I didn't get those crystals in the 6 month
yeah, too
version.
young of a cheese. That if that one were to be older, you would see it. It would taste different too, because it's a different cheese maker.
And
So
one other thing I just noticed, Joe, is that when I got to the rind, then a whole other flavor popped. So
mhm.
so again, you're supposed to eat the rind on these cheeses, right? I mean, it would be a sin to throw away the rind, right?
I agree with you. It's really your preference. Here's what we can say: not going to hurt you, and it's your choice. Does it add to the eating experience? Does it add value? Does it take away? Um,
I think it adds. I mean, I just got like this. I'm enjoying sort of the crumb of the piece, and then all of a sudden I'm getting to
yeah,
the crust, and all of a sudden a whole other flavor profile pops up, and
yeah.
and again it has a little bit more of the funky quality, but in a really good way, not in a you know not in a I don't know what the right way to say it, but it's not negative at all. It just
Yeah.
enhances it, but it gives it more complexity.
And to our pizza makers that are using Legrier AOP or Emmentaler AOP on a pizza, chances are it's a younger profile like that one. And I've seen the cooks or the chefs cut away the rind, and there's just no reason to do that. What they should be doing is removing the paper label with the back of a dull knife, wiping the rind down, clean it with a hot cloth, and then usually they're shredding for pizza. Shred the whole thing, rind, crust, all. If it looks a little too crummy on the top, like you just again scrape it with like a peeler or a cheese plane. They take the minimal surface away needed to then proceed, but don't literally cut all the rind off. Just put it in your mix and shredded cheese and bake it and use it. Don't waste that money. It's part of the cheese. And sometimes when I'm able to have a conversation with a chef about that, they really thank me because it's just like I just helped their food costs on that item by like 3% or something.
Right, right.
It's
And
like
if you're
like
making
I
a
handed them money.
fondue, if you're making a fondue out of these cheeses, then you would definitely want to mix the rind in with or is that a time where maybe you wouldn't?
Again, a preference. I would take a peeler and really make sure there's no. If they're using an aged cheese, I think you want to remove the rind. But on a super young cheese,
Mhm.
you could just put it in there. It's just going to look like little specks in there, like a
Okay,
spices in there. It's not going to hurt the fondue. That's also a matter of preference. How silky do you want it? If you're serving to the public and you do that at this point in time, they're going to send it back. They're going to say something's inside my
I
fondue.
said, yeah, yeah,
So it
yeah,
just depends, on the situation. If you're home with your family and you spent good money on cheese and you're grading it yourself and you're not buying a fondue mix, like why not? I would like to
okay.
create a trend where there is a fondue natural mix, meaning the rind and everything, and then the price can be kept even more affordable because in certain situations the rinds are absolutely delicious depending on the cheese.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't have to cut them away.
Well, before we run out of time, I want to get
Yeah,
to the raclette. So let me try this one, and it's not one that is commonly. I mean, isn't raclette normally melted, or is it held over some kind of a heat lamp or something when it's served in on cheese boards or what?
that's the most viral popular thing that you see happening now. I mean, raclette videos have become, especially with social media and the quick reels, someone scraping raclette onto a bowl of food has become a pretty sexy thing. So, but a good raclette, like we work with a raclette from a maker in the Valais. So raclette is a word also that gets, used in different regions of the world. France has a claim on the word too, so there's not been a real ruling that I'm aware of. But Raclette du Valais AOP, that is a specific place that's small production. It's not far; it's just over the border and mountains from Fontina. So
Mm,
Fontina and Raclette du Valais AOP, they're going to be similar in the sense,
mm,
even down to cow breed. But Raclette du Valais AOP is a tiny place in production wise versus even raclette Swiss, which could be made anywhere in Switzerland with Swiss milk, and then raclette from other countries. So there's all these subdivisions, but raclette du Valais AOP is even a smaller subset. It melts at a lower temperature. It's
mm.
silky. The crust is absolutely delicious, but there's good inspired versions. I'm sure what the one you're eating is a tasty inspired version, but some could argue that it could just be a table cheese if it's a delicious if it's like I think the raclette du Valais AOP deserves its right as a table cheese. It's just that delicious as well.
Yeah, and it definitely has. I definitely got a little onion, onion hint with this one, and some crystals. But it's cream. The cheese was creamy as I got closer to the rind. I got this crystallization, and um, and yeah, it does remind me a little bit of a fontina.
Mhm.
And but it's milder than I was expecting. It's pretty smooth. This is a French one that we're
Yeah,
using today. No, I think yeah, because
yeah,
that's all she had. Yeah,
yeah.
but so typically this would be used. It could be used just as a table cheese, but often it's used what as a melter or as a
In the USA, it seems the trend is, from what I see, 90. There's almost like a season. Somehow, it's also has to do with, well, it has to be cold outside. I think we're stretching the season out, where we're getting into spring more, and hey, put it on the grill and put it on burgers. But it seems to be eaten. I'm gonna take no, I'm not, I haven't studied any data on this, but I'm gonna take a stab at this. I'm gonna say 95% of the time it's melted, it's eaten in a melted form. You know,
it's
or maybe more. Maybe someone will say, Joe, it's 100%. I'm like, okay.
it's
I
it,
haven't really studied it, but
it's
that's
a,
just
it's
how it is. It's a beautiful melting cheese.
it's a beautiful melting cheese. It's sort of like the forerunner. The Americans have bastardized it into Velveeta or something like that. But it's the top of the mountain peak of sort of this melting cheese. Well, this has
Yeah.
been great because I've learned a lot just talking about all these things. I hope I can retain even a fraction of what we talked about today, but we covered a lot. I've got some cheese left that I'll be sharing with my wife. And I'm going to try to impress her by telling her now what flavor tone she should look for and what the differences are in each of these. Um,
Yeah.
and Joe, thank you so much for being, with us today on Pizza Quest and for,
Yeah.
for your quest. We would love to hear more about why you ended up leaving the chef world to enter into the cheese world, but
Oh,
we're gonna have to save that for the next time we have you on. We'd love to have you on again, and maybe when
yeah.
I can get my hands on some of the AOP raclettes and and uh, what's the other one that I didn't have today? The Emmental. I'll get
Yeah.
that the real deal, and maybe we can go to the deeper dive level the next time we have you.
Let me know. I mean, I'd still always cook, and I'll be making pizza soon as well with one or some of these cheeses. And yeah, we'll be in touch, and we'll figure
Let's
out the
compare
inside
notes
stuff.
when you do the pizzas. I'd love to hear what you think, and if you have any recommendations for our listeners for specific recommendations of which cheeses to use. I've been making some of the flammekuchs, the tarte flambe pizzas lately, and using Gruyere on my version of that. So, and I love that.
Right
But
on. Yeah, I have recipes of both pizza and the. Is it Flammkuchen you're talking about? Is that the same
yeah,
thing?
yeah,
Yeah,
flammekuchen and tarte flambe are the same. Yeah,
yeah. I can send you my recipes for those, which include Emmentaler, I believe.
there
So
you go. Yeah.
see what you think of them. I'd be curious.
Well, it would make sense because again, usually there's bacon or something else, some kind of a ham product with it. So it's ham and
Yeah.
it's the ultimate ham and cheese.
Ultimate. I'm getting hungry right now just thinking
All
about it.
right. Well, thanks for making us hungry and
Yeah.
for educating us. We look forward to continuing this conversation with you in the future. Best
Great.
of success with cutting the curd. For those of you who are listening, definitely check out the whole menu of cutting the curd on the hrn.org
Yeah.
homepage. And Joe, say hello to your co-host to.
I will. If I may, please follow us at Cutting the Curd. That's our Instagram handle. And if anybody wants to follow me at Sting Chef, there's always a connection between the
Well,
two.
say that last one at what?
At Sting Chef.
Sting Chef. Sting Chef. Okay, Sting. And say hi to Kara and Jessica, your co-host for me as well.
I will.
We
Thank
will
you.
see you again soon. And for those of you who are with us today, we'll see you on the next episode of Pizza Quest. Thanks.